कर्म फल हेतुर्भूर् माते संगोस्तु कर्मणि. Translation by His Grace A.C. Bhaktivedanta Swami Srila Prabhupada Ki Jai. You have a right to perform your prescribed duty. You all can repeat as well. You have a right to perform your prescribed duty, but you are not entitled to the fruits of action. Never consider yourself the cause of the results of your activities. And never be attached to not doing your duty. So, from this verse, we understand what the essence of our duties are, right? The main message that Krishna is delivering here is that we need to focus on doing our dharma rather than the results of our duties. So, at the very beginning, Arjuna was fearful of the results of this war. He almost did not fulfill his duties as a Kshatriya, right? He didn't want to see his family being killed off on the battlefield. And so he went to Krishna with this concern. And Krishna said, no, Arjuna, you are a Kshatriya. You have to do your duties. And so that's something that is quite important here to remember, is our dharma is very important. And so another point I want to bring up is, here Krishna talks about how we shouldn't become attached to the results of something, right? And the reason why is, if we become too attached and if we're disappointed by such results, we're going to be discouraged from continuing to doing our duties, right? So you may think that, this didn't go exactly the way I wanted it to go. Now I guess I shouldn't do it anymore. Right? So then we kind of lose value in doing our duties, which is not great. So it's very important to not get attached to the results. And another reason why attachment is important is because everything is temporary in this material world, right? Everything degrades. The only thing that's permanent is our soul, where Krishna is present, right? Our soul passes on lifetime to lifetime. And I like to think about our lives as an equation where Krishna is the constant, right? So here's a simple equation. Maybe some of you may know it, maybe some of you may not. It's PV equals nRT. PV equals nRT is a chemistry equation, also I guess physics, and it's used to calculate pressure, volume, temperature, right? But in this equation, R is the ideal gas constant, which means it has a set value, a set number, and it's always this number. Whenever you use this equation, you always plug in, I think it's maybe 8.3 or something like that, in for R. Okay, so R never changes. And in our lives, our R is Krishna, right? Krishna is constant. He's always there for us, regardless of what other values you put into the P, V, N, or T, the R will always be R. So I think that's a really important thing to remember, is our lives are constantly changing, right? We have lots of things going on. There's certain variables that may affect our lives, but the one thing that is always going to be there is Krishna, and that's very important to remember. And so we also don't control our destiny, right? Destiny is controlled by Krishna and by karma and by the P and V and N and T. Right? So that's another reason why attachment to results is, it's important that we don't get attached to results. So rather, we should practice detachment, right? This way we can focus on our self-growth, so our spiritual self-growth, rather than material growth, which is not necessarily guaranteed. So while detachment is good, inaction is also bad. So doing nothing gets you nowhere. Right? Money doesn't grow on trees. You can't expect to be rich one day and you have a bank full of money. Similarly, if you're hungry, a plate of food is not just going to appear out of nowhere, right? I'm sure a lot of you are thinking about a great prasadam plate in front of you right now. But if I just think about it, prasadam, prasadam, boom, no prasadam in front of me, right? You have to go up and you have to get that prasadam. Luckily, very graciously to our temple devotees who cook for us, we don't even have to cook the prasadam for today. We just have to go and get it. So I think that's very important to remember, that inaction doesn't give us any results. right? We have to work towards a spiritual goal. We have to work towards material goals. So here I have two examples that I thought were very representative of this verse. So Lakshman and Ambarish Maharaj. So Lakshman, he was very focused on his duty as a brother to Ram and as a brother-in-law to Sita in the forest, right? When he heard Ram's voice in the forest saying, Lakshman, come help me, he ran after him as a brother to go do his brotherly duties. But he didn't forget his duty as a brother-in-law to protect Sita, right? He drew the Lakshman Rekha around Sita to make sure that she was also protected. So even in this situation of distress, he still did not stray from his duties. And I think that's very important to remember. And then Ambarish Maharaj, he had many prescribed duties as a king, and he tolerated injustice from sages like Durvasa Muni, yet he also continued to be very diligent in his duties, and he didn't expect anything in return. So this is my personal reflection on this verse. So in our work lives, we should not focus on our salaries. I know that it is hard sometimes. I am now very newly working, but I am working, so I understand. Also, as a student, I would say that studying for exams is very stressful. I'm assuming all of you were students at some point in your life if you are no longer now, so you know how this is. But it is quite stressful and overwhelming, and even in your workplace, let's say you have a training or a skills assessment, you have to practice quite a bit. And so often I find myself focusing so much on the fact that I need to get a really good grade. And I'm just like, oh, let me pull up a grade calculator, a GPA calculator. Let me see what grade I need to get in order to get an A in this class, right? And I spent so much time worrying on the actual grade rather than studying, right? And when I do this, my exam results are maybe not as high as I expected them to be. So I think the important thing to remember is you should focus on doing your duties, and I should focus on doing my duties as an actual student rather than worrying about the results of such duties, right? Also, the results of my exams, it's not under my control, right? It's possible that I could get sick or there's a family emergency and I have to go tend to such circumstances. And so I might not even be able to take the exam that I practice day and night for, right? So I think it's very important to remember that we shouldn't expect results for everything that we do, right? You should just do your duties and the results will come. So the next verse, 6.5. Uttaradatmanatmanam Natmanam avashadayet Atmaiva yatmano bandhur Atmaiva ripuratmanaha. One must deliver himself with the help of his mind and not degrade himself. The mind is the friend of the conditioned soul and his enemy as well. So here, right, Krishna talks about the mind being the friend or the enemy. Actually, this entire chapter, chapter 6, is really focused on the mind. And so I think what I understood from this verse is we need to understand ourselves before criticizing ourselves, right? Often we tend to be our worst enemy, right? We tend to just keep beating ourselves up over things. So, but in order for us to even criticize, we have to understand what is it that encourages us and discourages us, right? What is it that gets us going, that motivates us to work harder in our lives, and what is it that prevents us from working so hard? So understanding oneself is very important before you start criticizing yourself. And so here's another thing, right? We get upset when others mistreat us, but yet we still mistreat ourselves, right? Why do we do that? Why do we self-deprecate, right? And I think it's very important to understand that when we self-deprecate, we discourage ourselves, which is very harmful in the long run. So this is where you have to understand what is the difference between constructive and destructive self-criticism, right? Constructive criticism, you're trying to improve yourself, right? You're not just beating yourself down. But it becomes destructive when you pass this threshold of toxicity, right? When you pass this threshold of toxicity, you're constantly just beating yourself up and beating yourself up, and you're discouraging yourself from moving forward. So, and when you reach this form of destructive self-criticism, you often reach into the dark side of your mind, right? So greed, lust, anger, envy, illusion, or arrogance. And also this dark side of the mind is often reached by media. So instead of consuming media that pollutes the mind, we should consume media that uplifts the mind, right? So if you think about it this way, the media, we're constantly taking in new media, right? Whether it be the news or on Instagram or Facebook or YouTube. But if you think about it, whatever is on the media is just the compilation of the minds of other people, right? So we're letting the minds of others pollute our own minds. So the best way to prevent this is to expose ourselves to media that is more uplifting, right? So spiritually uplifting media like listening to kirtan or watching lectures or dramas, that's a great way to prevent our mind from entering the dark side, entering lust, greed, anger, envy, illusion, arrogance. And only once we learn how to control this mind, only once do we learn how this mind works in conjunction with our senses, right? So everything that we consume and all the information that we take in, can we understand how to actually train and control our minds, right? So again, understanding oneself, understanding one's environment, and how we take in the information and what we do with that information. So I like to think of our minds like a GPS, right? Our mind says, turn left, you turn left. Turn right, turn left. Oop, I missed a turn. Rerouting, right? And then we're either lost or we're going around in circles, right? But so sometimes your GPS will lose satellite and you have to reroute. But once the satellite is back, your GPS finds the best route for you, right? So sometimes it's important to reroute our minds similarly, right? We need to reroute, really think through everything that we're taking in. When I go to work, I listen to this, or I take in this. When I read this, I think about it this way. Really process all the information that you take in and how you process that information. And that's how you can kind of learn how to control the mind a bit. And now controlling the mind is definitely not easy. And all of you definitely know this, I believe. So it takes many years and lots of patience. And I'm definitely not even close to being there yet. I would say controlling the mind is kind of like training for a marathon, right? I'm not a marathon runner. I don't know if any of you are. Kudos to you if you are. It's a lot of work, a lot of mental and physical endurance. But training for a marathon is training like the mind, because when you train for a marathon, you have to prepare your body for years and months, right? You have to understand your own body before you can just go and run a marathon. Similarly, when you're trying to control the mind, you have to understand your mind before you can just try to control it. You can't hold the reins if you don't have the reins to hold, right? So I think the biggest thing from this verse is we have to learn how to understand ourselves and the mind before we can learn how to control it. So 2 examples of mind control are Prahlad and Ravan, 2 very opposite examples, shall I say. The first, Prahlad, right? He was always focused on Lord Vishnu. Even during the greatest moments of distress, when he's in a pit of snakes, he's at the bottom of a cliff, he's in a fire, his mind was constantly focused on Lord Vishnu. He had that control, right? And the mind was his friend, and that's why he was able to be saved by Lord Vishnu. He was such a pure devotee. On the other hand, Ravan's false ego was his Achilles heel, right? That was his source of defeat. His mind became his enemy. His false ego took over everything. And even though he did have the intelligence, he had this boon, and he had so many things, but he used them for his personal gain, right? So this is my personal reflection. So college is the ideal place for sense gratification, as many would say. No parents equals freedom, but that's not the case. College is, in my opinion, the ultimate test for all of your Krishna conscious knowledge, right? How capable are you of differentiating lust and desire from love and intention? How capable are you of applying everything that you've learned up till now in the real world where your parents aren't there to tell you what to do, right? There's peer pressure, there's alcohol, there's drugs. And I learned to that's the one bit of control I have, I think, is I've learned to kind of control my mind in a way that I don't consider those as temptations, right? So I think that's just growing up in this community. I know what's better and I have very strong morals and values. But I think that's very important to remember that that's the little bit of control that I've had. But yeah. And this little picture I guess I have here is when I looked at this, I thought the images or the pictures. There's two faces, right? So the pictures that are on the right side are how our mind wants to think of those 4 items, right? But the left side is how our mind actually should think of those items. So it's how we should train our minds before and afters. Okay, so the third verse, 8.7. Tasmad sarveshu kaleshu Mamanushmara yudhyacha Mayarpita mano buddhi Mame vaishyasi samshayaha. Therefore, Arjuna, you should always think of me in the form of Krishna. And at the same time, carry out your prescribed duty of fighting. With your activities dedicated to me, and your mind and intelligence fixed on me, you will attain me without doubt. So here, the big point is that we should always keep Krishna in the center, right? As mentioned before, focusing on our duties is very important, but the focus should not only be material, right? We have to make everything very Krishna-centric. So keep Krishna at the center of everything. And now, how do we focus on material duties and Krishna at the same time, right? Our mind is going sometimes 1,000 miles a minute. And it's so hard to just hone in on that one thing. So here, Arjuna carried out his duties as a Kshatriya while keeping Krishna in mind. Luckily, he had Krishna right next to him, right there to guide him the whole way, right? We may not have him physically right here, he is still physically right there. And I think that's very important to remember, and that's something that we tend to forget, is he's always there, right? But we're not necessarily always thinking about him, even though he's always there. But the more we think about him, the more we get used to thinking of him naturally, so that when it's our time of departure from this world, we'll think of him naturally, right? So here, repetition is key, right? The more you hear, the more you chant, the more you sing, the more you read, the easier it is for your mind to naturally think of Krishna, right? Let's say you've never heard of, you've never been to a lecture, you don't know what Krishna consciousness is, right? Hearing maybe his name once will not necessarily be enough to just help you reach him at your time of death, right? So we need to keep thinking about him. So the way I like to think about this is studying and memorization, right? Let's say I have a biology test coming up and I need to memorize a certain signaling pathway for this one class. If I look at it once, now these can be quite complicated. If I look at it once, I'm not just going to remember it for the exam, right? I have to keep recalling, I have to keep rereading, I have to keep looking, I have to keep reciting it, saying it out loud. And only then will I be able to recall it during the time of the exam, right? So repetition is really important in this case. And we can find this repetition by finding little things in our daily lives that remind us of Krishna, right? So daily activities, as said in the Srimad Bhagavatam, right? Shravanam, Kirtanam, Vishnu, Smaranam, Pada, Sevanam, Archanam, Vandanam, Dasyam, Sakyam, Atmani, Nidanam, right? So there's, besides even, in addition to devotional service, there's other ways that we can incorporate Krishna into our lives. And I'll elaborate on this a little bit later. But the important thing to remember here is always remember Krishna, never forget Krishna. So 2 examples of this verse I had were Hanuman and Bharat Maharaj, right? Hanuman, he was a servant and a devotee of Lord Ram, and he kept Lord Ram at the center of his duties all the time, right? He went to Lanka to deliver Ram's message, and regardless of what happened to him, he had his tail lit on fire. Luckily, we don't have tails that can be lit on fire, but he went there and he delivered his message, and he also brought back Sita's message for Ram, right? But he kept Lord Ram at the center of all of these duties. And he also went to the Himalayas to go get the Sanjeevani Buddhi when Lakshman was hurt. And Bharat Maharaj also dedicated his life to Krishna. He performed his duties as a king and a son, but he fell victim to attachment to a deer, right? And even after he was reincarnated as a deer, he was still living the life of bhakti as a deer because of his previous dedication to the Lord. So my personal reflection for this verse. When I first moved into my dorm room at college, I was extremely homesick. I mean, I had never been away this far away from home before. And the only thing I wanted to do when I came back to visit, and this was only once a month, I made sure to come Sunday feast every Sunday. And my parents will tell you this, when I used to come home, I told them, no, we're gonna go to Sunday. Like, even if, it doesn't matter if I was tired, it doesn't matter if I had to be up at 6 a.m. the next morning to catch a train to Stony Brook, I would be at Sunday feast. And this was my sanity, right? For me, coming here, I grew up in this community, so coming here every Sunday, this was a little piece of me that I missed a lot moving away. But to make my dorm a little bit more homely, I set up a small altar on my desk, and then I also painted some frames. So the 2 bottom frames, the peacock feather and the quote, which says, failure is the pillar of success, then try again, you shall try, which is a quote by Srila Prabhupada. But, so I painted these paintings at school events, because I thought, why not, right? For whatever reason, that was the first thing that came to my head was, let me paint this peacock feather, or let me paint this quote. And so now these are permanently living in my dorm room. But this was one way that I found myself kind of reaching for Krishna, even though I was away from him, or it felt like I was away from him. And then during Kartik, at my little altar, I lit a diya every day for the month of Kartik. And so some of you may know, I am on a dance team at my school. I'm the vice president of Indian classical dance team. And the past 3 years, I've danced and choreographed to 3 Krishna pieces for Jana Seva, which is kind of our end of year Arangetram type recital. And so the first year we did Story of Kaliya, the second year we did Putna, and then this past year we just did Draupadi. So I find myself gravitating towards pieces and stories that I find familiar, right? Like doing dancing to Krishna pieces, it makes me feel at home, right? And so I think that the way I've been conditioned growing up here in this community is that when I think of Krishna, I think of home. And so this was a way for me to kind of incorporate Krishna into my life, where I didn't have necessarily access to this community that I have here. So another thing regarding the team is that we recently started to do national competitions, right? We just became a nationally competing team. And every year, every team is supposed to have a theme. So this year, being on the executive board of my dance team, it was up to myself and the co-captain to decide the theme. So just as a joke, I had mentioned possibly doing the story of Prahlad Hiranyakashipu as our competition piece. And I wasn't expecting anything of it because not many people were familiar with that story. But then I presented this story during our executive board meeting earlier this summer, and they voted on this to be our competition piece. So now we will actually be performing the story of Prahlad as our competition piece at our national competition this year. So I was very surprised by this, but I'm very grateful that that they all chose to go with this theme, because for me, it's like spreading awareness, right? Not a lot of people know about Krishna consciousness. Not a lot of people know about a lot of the stories, a lot of Krishna's pastimes, his avatars. So I'm really grateful that through a hobby, I'm able to kind of spread his message. I'm able to spread more about his story. I'm able to spread more about him, you know? And so I'm really grateful to be on a team where I'm able to incorporate Krishna into something that I love to do. So basically what I'm trying to say is, through all of this, I did my duties as a student, but I also tried to incorporate Krishna along the way. And I think that's very important to remember, right? This verse says that regardless of what we do, right, all of our duties should be Krishna-centered. Everything should be Krishna-centric. And that's what I try to do, although I'm not anywhere near professional, anywhere yet, no expert, nothing. But I try to do a little bit. I'm sure many of you are definitely doing more than I am, and are definitely practicing more than I am. But this is just a little bit of what I have been doing. So just a summary of everything that we've discussed today, right? 2.7, we talked about the essence of our duties. So understanding what our dharma is, material attachment versus detachment, right? Everything in this world is temporary besides the soul. That's what's permanent. And inaction does not give us results, right? So then the two examples we talked about were Lakshman and Ambarish Maharaj. Then next we talked about 6.5, the mind as the friend or the enemy, where we talked about understanding ourselves and how our minds work and how we process the information that we take in from our senses, as well as self-deprecation, the difference between constructive and destructive self-criticism, as well as the dark side of the mind and how we need to prevent our dark side of the mind by coming into play. And we could possibly do so by preventing our minds from being polluted by media, right? So consumption of media that is more spiritually uplifting, as well as learning how to train the mind using all of these above points, right? Learning how to train the mind and control the mind, which is quite a lengthy and a process that requires a lot of patience. And two examples we had here were Ravan and Prahlad, right? Very opposite examples, but both examples of this verse. And then next we had 8.7, right, where we talked about keeping Krishna at the center, keeping Krishna as the focus of all of our duties, right? How we need to continuously repeat, as in we should always involve Krishna in everything and constantly repeat those activities in order to remember him on our deathbed, right? So involving Krishna into our daily activities, even if it's the smallest thing, right? Just listening to kirtan on the way to work, or listening to a lecture while you're cooking dinner, or dancing, or painting, whatever it may be. And the two examples here were Bharat Maharaj and Hanuman. So that is all the points that I had for all of you. These are just some of the realizations I've collected in the past 3 years, more than the rest of the years, I suppose. Being in college really makes you introspect about everything that you've learned spiritually and how relevant it is to your actual lives. I think I didn't realize so much when I was still at home with my parents, but being away from home, it really pushed me into thinking about what is Krishna consciousness to me, right? How am I applying all of these years, how am I applying everything that I've learned in Sunday school for the past 15 years? Where is this knowledge going, right? Is it actually in here or is it lost, right? So just pulling things out of there is, I think, what I've been doing. And also, reading scriptures can be quite intimidating, you know? I'm definitely still, most definitely a beginner. And so I find that the Bhagavad Gita actually isn't as intimidating as it seems, is what I've learned during this journey. It's a lot of information, but it's broken down in a way that's very processable. And it allows for a lot of self-reflection. So one lasting point I want to leave you all with: always remember Krishna, never forget Krishna. Always remember Krishna, never forget Krishna. Always remember Krishna, never forget Krishna. Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare. Hare Ram, Ram Ram, Hare Hare. I just want to thank you all for listening in today. Please do forgive me if I've made any offense or any mistakes, and please do correct me if I'm wrong. I guess we have a little bit of time for questions if anybody has any. Go ahead, Rosie.
I remember how I acted when I went to college. I was crying, and when I come home, I didn't want to go back to where I was. But at that time, I didn't have any knowledge of conscious living. But the way you did it, wonderful.
Oh, thank you, Rosie. The mercy of all of you devotees here. It's my spiritual family and the deities and Srila Prabhupada. So, yeah.
Hare Krishna. So very nice class, very wonderfully explained. I really appreciated how these three verses gradually took us deeper. First was our external world, about work and everything, how we can, work-life balance, then we can reflect on our mind in the second part, and then the third is more spiritual, more soul-centric, how Krishna is the most important thing, and we have to dedicate everything to Krishna. So thank you so much.
I had a comment, and I'm just going to throw in a question if you can answer it. But firstly, it didn't seem like your first time. I think you were awesome. There is there's an old saying where you can have an impact, and if you've experienced it, then you teach it, then you actually have a great impact. So I think the way you explained it was very clear that you've experienced this whole thing, right? And your impact was awesome. So thank you for that. And, you took us all to a home life, which has been decades back. One thing I noticed is what you introspected in college. Most of us introspect later in life. And I think that it's a real blessing, and it's great that you were able to do that. It's fantastic, actually. Something which we thought of very late in life, so it's great that you thought it early enough, and I wanted you to know that. So continue that introspection and building this connection. Certainly, there's a lot of meaning there. Wanted to ask you, you took dance as an art form to express Krishna. What if, we have high schoolers, or we're dealing with high schoolers at points, what if they're into other activities? If you have any thoughts in common, say to sports or something, how do you really connect that back to Krishna? It would really help if you have.
That's a hard question, actually. I would say every person is different, right? Not everybody necessarily loves to dance. Not everybody finds joy in it. And I think what's important is finding Krishna in a way that makes them happy, right? So maybe if they're into sports, you said teenagers?
Yeah, high schoolers.
High schoolers, right. That's tough.
The only link I could find was, hey, God has given you a body, you got to take care of it. That's about it.
Yeah, that's true. I think, well, you have me some energy. If I could pass this on to anybody, if anybody would like to take it.
I mean, Krishna in
I
a
think
way.
you said it, yes.
You said it, you said it. I mean, Krishna in a way
Krishna
that
the
was.
way you-
Yeah, I guess I mean, it doesn't necessarily maybe connect to sports always, but I think just finding Krishna in anything that makes you happy, right? Let's say maybe you really love soccer, right? Maybe play it into a game. If you lose, you have to memorize this many verses from the Bhagavad Gita. I know that's not really a great example, but it's some sort of incentive, right? Perhaps. And I guess that's not the best example, maybe, because then they'll think about it as a chore. But just finding small ways to incorporate it, perhaps.
I think it just gave me something to think about.
Yeah.
Because as you're playing soccer or doing something, it helps to make your mind stronger, right? Again,
Mm.
it's a way of practicing Krishna consciousness. Is do your best, don't focus on the outcome. And I think it's like taking exams in a way. So it's a way to practice the Lord and how you should be with the Lord.
Yeah.
I think I'm just talking to you.
Yeah, now that you said that, I think that kind of connects to what I said about the last verse, right? Kind of remember Krishna as much as you can during your activities, and also the first verse, right? Let's say you're playing soccer and you have a big soccer game. You should just focus on playing soccer, not on the results, right? It's okay if you win, it's okay if you lose, right? If you lose, then you'll try harder next time. But I think what's important is you focus on your duty as a soccer player, right? So the thing is, like, it's not so much actively practicing during playing sports. It's more like active recall, right? So how much can you apply from what you've learned in what you do?
That makes a lot of sense. Thank you. Very good.
I just wanted to add, like, you talk about soccer, like, even if we could practice like gratitude, because thank Krishna that he gave me this sort of talent, or he gave me this ability to kind of play the sport, which not everyone gets, or give me this opportunity to be part of a team, which not everyone gets, right? So,
Shri Gauri Mataji.
right. That's a very good thing.
And also mataji, what I always read, anywhere we go, I make sure we sing Nashim Pradeep. Whether it is smallest thing we do, as soon as you leave the door, sitting in the car, sing Nashim Pradeep. So indirectly, you are bringing Krishna in the heart on whatever activity you do.
I think it's about bringing. It's like your last point. You're bringing Krishna into everything. So you can bring it into soccer too.
Yep, always remember Krishna, never forget Krishna. Thank you, everybody. Haribol.
And such a wonderful, wonderful class. Let's give her a really loud. Many of you are probably too old, but how many of you remember a book called The Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy? Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy. So when Nandini was talking about the chemistry equation, and Krishna is a constant of 8.3, in that Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy, they had a computer called Deep Thought, and it was processing for 7.5 million years. And at the end of it, it said the answer to the life, universe, and everything is 42. That was the conclusion. So Krishna was a constant there too. So anyway, it was so many takeaways, and one of the points that really struck me is, Sunday school, and so how much valuable it is to our community as an asset. My kids grew up through Sunday school too, and we see yet another beautiful example, and we take it for granted, and we don't realize what an asset it is. But when these kids go to college and they actually have the values that our Sunday school, our Krishna conscious Prabhupada's teachings kind of embed in them, that's when they rekindle. Prabhupada always said that, these teachings may not fructify immediately. They are like time bombs. At the appropriate times, they will reveal themselves, and they will be so incredibly valuable. So Nandini is a great example of that, and I'm sure many of our other kids will be. But this was actually a very, very wonderful class and thought, and thank you so much for taking the time to do that. Thank you very much.